Hello, so today is new patch day, which means we're going to do our top 3 non-reroll and top 3 reroll comps for the patch. The way that I do this normally is that I'm going to pick 3 non-reroll, so level 8 style comps, playing around 4 costs, and 3 reroll comps where you're playing around low cost units that I think are good for consistency and just generally being safe picks for the current patch. These aren't going to be necessarily the highest capping comps that are going to get you like the most like giga firsts in your games, but these are things that can get you a little bit started in the game and not be super punishing and give you like some good chances to convert to a nice top 4 for yourself. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. We just did our patch review recently, so no big changes there, but now we're going to be talking about our best comps like we do every patch. I also do VOD reviews occasionally, and then I'm going to get back to doing daily guides. So usually on this channel, I'm just trying to give as much information as possible and try and help out in your TFT set 14 experience. So if you like that style of content, make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out. Now let's go through the comps. So number 1, this one I think is very good for this patch, and that is Exotech. So Exotech in the recent patch got buffed. So now Exotech, specifically we're going to be talking about 7 Exotech here, it now gives a massive amount of HP to all your units. So the way it works is you get Exotech items, which I think everybody's kind of familiar with. Those Exotech items only work on the Exotech units. But then additionally, no matter what items you put on a unit, if you're putting them on an Exotech unit, they will gain health and attack speed for each item. So that's not just the Exotech items. So basically, every single item that you put on a unit will give them 300 HP. Specifically the Exotech units, and it will give them 13 attack speed. This is a recent buff, and it's actually a huge buff to the amount of HP that it gives the units. What does that mean? It just makes it so that this comp actually is very stable and has a lot of HP to chew through. So you have a lot of units that have a lot of good effects, right? You have basically 3 stun units. You have Varus, Mordekaiser, and Sejuani with the Giga Stuns that helps this board to kind of sustain itself for a very long period of time. And now with the HP buffs, it's actually really consistent. If you're looking for consistent comps, just as a general tip, if you're newer to TFT, a lot of times having like a really stable comp that has a lot of tankiness to it is generally going to allow your backline to scale up and do a lot of damage. So Exotech is now kind of becoming like that, and it makes it really, really good of an option this patch. So in terms of your actual items, Zeri, typically you want at least 1 Guinsoo, and then you're looking for one of the Exotech items to put on her, typically if she's going to be your main carry. Pulse Stabilizer is considered to be the best of the Zeri items. It just allows her to execute, and it gives her crit, so that's just great. But the execute is really good because she just melts, and then she'll eventually hit that unit and kill them off very efficiently. So usually it's Pulse Stabilizer. Technically, you can also put the yellow one, which is a Flux Capacitor. This one's like kind of like more of an attack speed geared item, which could work well on Zeri. A lot of times if you see Pulse Stabilizer, Flux Capacitor, a lot of times you did Flux Capacitor with like double Guinsoo builds, but it's going to be worse than your Pulse Stabilizer. And then in the worst case scenario, Hyper Fangs would be your 3rd pick if you don't have another Zeri item. Typically what you'll do is you'll look at your Exotech items and see if you have either Pulse Stabilizer or Flux Capacitor or Hyper Fangs, and then decide if you're going to play Zeri or not. But if you're in a spot to play 7 Exotech, I strongly recommend it still, because I think that you're just going to have such an HP advantage on your board that you're going to be relatively stable even if you don't necessarily upgrade all of your units. If we're talking about like turbo good items as well, Zeri attacks a lot and she has rapid fire in typically, so what you would like to have is Kraken. Kraken's Fury works really well. You just get stacking attack damage with your auto attacks, and she just auto attacks a bunch, so it works really nicely. But still, try and make items that make sense. You know, Kraken's Fury could work out really well, but if you have something like a Pulse Stabilizer, you can also go for like a Guard Breaker or Striker's Flail, because it has really good synergy in that regard. Zeri also is really good with different emblems, specifically like a Dynamo emblem is really nice, and also a Marksman emblem could be really nice on her. So those are other options of itemizing and playing around the Zeri if you're in a spot like a loot sub game where you have like extra emblems, or if you're taking something like Trait Tracker and playing around lots of emblems. So your Zeri items, very flexible, lots of different options there. In terms of your front line, typically, this is going to sound a little bit weird, but Mordekaiser is usually kinda your main tank in a way, it's kind of sounds a little bit weird, but Sejuani, she's like kind of good, but sometimes she just dies. She's really good at casting. So what you really care about is to have mana gen items on the Sejuani or starting mana on the Sejuani to get an ult off as early as possible and increase your chances of having multiple ults. So basically, if you can, you're just going to spam as many Protector's Vows on the Sejuani as possible. That's your go-to. Just as many Protector's Vows as possible on the Sejuani. And then typically your Exotech items and your other tank items, like if you have like Giga Armor, Giga magic resist, a lot of times you end up just putting it on the Mordekaiser and you make him like the Giga tank. And then obviously if you have your Exotech items, try and fit them with their abilities on whoever you can. Like if you have a bunch of Protector's Vows, it could make good sense to put the I think it's this one. One of them scales off shields, right? Shields are more effective, so this works really well with Protector's Vow. But either way, any of the tank Exotech items you can put on whoever you want, and then obviously Hollow Bow can go on your Varus if you can. With this comp now, Jhin also got a little bit of buff, so Jhin is a good item holder and can be really stable. And then in order to activate Marksman and Rapid Fire, a lot of times you'll play around Kindred. If you're trying to cap this board really high into your late game, something that works really well is Garen, obviously. Garen just being able to spread around some of these other inter-team synergies like Bastion, or if you get Bruiser in, if you have an Exotech emblem, it can work really well. But even Marksman and Rapid Fire, just putting them on different units on your board, like Zeri getting Marksman, for example, can actually increase your damage a lot. And obviously, if you can spread Exotech to any non-Exotech units, this is especially important if you have an Exotech emblem, you get so much value because not only can they use the Exotech items, which is a lot of broken synergies with the 5 cost, but it also helps you to give yourself a lot of extra HP and a lot of extra stats because of the Exotech trait being so powerful right now. So that's like your little crash course on Exotech. I just wanted to go through it a little bit because it's something that's a little bit newer, so it's not something you might have seen a lot before. But of course, you know, try and make Zeri items that make sense. Try and find Exotech items that fit well on your board. And ideally, hopefully you have a good time and it's not too many people contesting it. I know it's really popular, at least in the games I'm playing, there's at least 1 or 2 Exotech players every single game. Next comp that I would like to say that I think is fairly consistent, pretty strong, but I think also has a really high cap, Anima Squad. So I talked about it a lot last little video like this for the last patch, but I think Anima Squad is just really good. I think it's fairly consistent. I think you're relatively stable as long as you hit your units. Also now with the addition of Zeri and playing around Sejuani, there's a little bit less people, especially since Dynamo's a lot worse, playing around Leona. And I think that's a huge buff to Anima Squad because obviously if you hit the Leona 2-star, you're pretty stable. Like if you hit Xayah 2, Leona 2, you're good to go. You can go to level 9, try and cap out around Aurora and cap out around legendary units. Typically when you're playing this board, there's lots of really cool enabling augments that are really powerful. There's stuff like all the Anima related emblems, all the Anima related augments. Anima emblem is really good with this comp because you can just play a 5 cost in place of somebody else. Little buddies, a lot of the combats are really good. If you have little buddies, you can always drop Yumi and just play some of the other units. But it just works out really nicely. And it gives you a lot of stability because Anima itself gives a lot of weapons. Additionally, if you're stuck on a low level, you can also reroll for 3-star versions of some of the cheaper units because it also powers up the Anima Squad weapons, so it can often stabilize you and allow you to play for a top 4 if you're not able to like level 9 and play around high cap type boards. A lot of times if you're going to level 9, obviously units like Garen can help scale you, even a Zac can help scale you, but even some of the other units like Renekton could work out really well. Aurora has great pull-in targets, so upgrading 5 costs is a really strong thing to do. Viego can also work if you have Techie active in, you keep in your Seraphine, but typically you're going to see this board being played with like a Renekton as the next in just to activate Bastion and to help out that way, and then usually you pull in a Kabuko with the Aurora because it works out really nicely. If you have an emblem, of course, then you can fit in more 5 costs and just try and play as many 5 costs as possible to give yourself maximum synergies. In terms of items, you have a lot of damage amp, and usually you would play this with a marksman just to give you some synergy. So a lot of times Jhin goes in here. You get Dynamo for Aurora, marksman for your what's it called, your Xayah. So with Xayah, typically what your items are going to look like is IE, IE pairs really well with Striker's Flail, just crit chance as well as giving damage amp. You already have some damage amp from Anima Squad and some regular armor and stuff like that. And then your last item, a lot of times you really want to have Shredder Sunder with this comp just to make sure that your Anima weapons are doing as much damage as possible. So a lot of times if you're building towards Xayah and you're not playing it like a fast 9 towards Aurora, you would usually make a Last Whisper. Of course, this last item could be anything. In a lot of cases, I even see Gunblade because the Xayah pumps out so much damage that keeping your units alive with Gunblade actually helps out a lot because then you get more procs of Anima Squad. So this can also be a viable build. But like I said, you usually want to build one of Last Whisper or like Void Staff just to make it so that whatever Anima Squad weapons you're choosing, either the AD or the AP ones, they kind of get a little bit of extra damage by reducing the armor or magic resist, whichever one's more significant. Because you get a bunch of armor from Anima Squad already, for Leona, I typically like to just have HP on her. She has a lot of durability from her ability, and she gets armor and MR from Anima Squad. So usually I'll just go for, like, you know, if possible, Warmogs. And of course, you can just build Giga Tank items on her, as many of the tank items with your tank components that work out and make sense with your board will work out here. Additionally, Aurora, really good at spreading different effects. So like if you make anti-heal or things like that, you can often put them on Aurora. Late game cap with Aurora, you can just go for it like to be the Giga Nuke with like, you know, Archangels and Jewel Gauntlet and just try and kill everybody off. Aurora 2 is a huge cap. So this board, if you can make it to level 9, legendaries with Aurora 2, you actually have a really good chance of winning the game in my opinion, unless other people have like crazy win conditions. This is one of those like comps that you can really stabilize hard on level 8, and if you have the potential of high rolling and make it to level 9, it still has a really high cap because of this Aurora 2 just doing an insane amount of damage as long as you have items for her. Lastly, this is going to be the third comp that we're going to talk about. We kind of talked about more of like an AD style comp. I think Anima Squad in terms of like AD as well kind of makes sense. Like a lot of times if you're playing around marksmans, I think Anima Squad is probably the better version of those, right? Marksman Vanguard is a little bit less high cap, so I think if you're able to hit Leona 2, Xayah 2, you're better off just playing Anima Squad in my opinion in a lot of those games. So that's what I would usually play if I'm playing like those AD lines. I would like to give you guys an AP consistent line or semi-consistent line. AP is a little bit awkward because a lot of them are conditional. The one that's the least conditional, I think, is Street Demon. So Street Demon would be my last pick for like a 4-cost style comp that you can pretty reliably play around. Street Demon, similar to Exotech, it just has the benefit of just giving your team a lot of bulk, giving your team a lot of survivability, which can actually help you be a lot more consistent. It's not necessarily the highest capping comp, right? It can cap very high. There are lots of ways to make this comp extremely powerful. But in general, just having that extra bulk that you benefit from with 7 Street Demon, the extra HP, and the whole board getting team-wide like stats and buffs can actually help you to be a lot more consistent. So typically when you're playing around this board, you play something like this, and then you play it with strategists. Of course, once you hit Samira, you usually drop Rengar or Jinx for the Samira. Usually it's Rengar, and you play something like this. And then your high cap, obviously, like you roll down, you try and find Ziggs. Ziggs now, his bug got removed, so this board might be a little bit more stable. I didn't personally get to try it yet because on the day 1 of the patch, I was trying more Exotech boards today, so I didn't get to try out Ziggs and see if Ziggs is a lot more consistent or if the bugs actually were fixed. But I think that it's going to help this board a lot because before Ziggs sometimes just didn't do any damage. There was a bug with him. So this actually helps out this board in general, which is really nice. And then often you cap out really high around your Kabuko, and this is like your board on like a level 9 situation. Obviously, if you have Emblem, you can play more 5 costs. When you're playing this board, usually you want to make it so that Brand is nuking as aggressively as possible. So he's going to have Techie, he's going to have base AP already from Street Demon and Techie. So a lot of times you want to convert that into a crit just so that it does a lot of damage on his ult or his active that he casts. So, you know, Shojin, generate mana, Jewel Gauntlet, really good. And then, of course, like a good pairing with Jewel Gauntlet, going to be your Striker's Flail or previously called Guard Breaker. Give you some damage amp and extra crit chance, which can work out pretty effectively. Additionally, this board can cap really high if you hit Samira 2. Samira can take all of your AD items. You can similarly build her in a crit style of build, totally fine. Or you can build her more towards like just general AD if you have like a Death Blade or something like that. She also can work really well with like Asterix in some cases, just because when she jumps in, she doesn't die instantly, and then it also procs the Asterix and she gets a bunch of extra AD with it. Asterix got nerfed a little bit, so be careful. This board can also benefit, from many items, because if you have utility items, they can often go on a Ziggs. So your anti-heal, your shredding, you can put them on the Ziggs, and then you can even build the Ziggs with some of these damage items if you so have them, and make Ziggs like a dual carry or a tertiary carry depending on how your items work out. Nico has a huge amount of durability already, so I usually like to just give her much stats. So like, you know, all your Giga Tank items, right? Maximum armor, maximum magic resist, and maximum HP, and then she's gonna have the strategist durability, so she's gonna be an absolute demon that's gonna be hard to kill. But I think this comp, like I said, relatively consistent, pretty reliable if you're trying to go for it. Just, you know, watch out if there's amp players in the lobby. Obviously, if you are playing more on a thinner margin and you have a lot of resources, you could just convert this into a 5 amp or an amp strategist style board, where you, instead of playing the other street demons, you cap out a lot higher by just playing the amp units instead. That's usually contingent on you finding the Samira early. What I'm trying to show you is the more consistent option if you're playing around AP in particular, or if you're forced to play around AP. So we kind of talked about the non-reroll comps. So those are our 4 cost comps, and I tried to explain them kind of briefly so you have a good idea of what you're kind of aiming for in those cases. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about some of the reroll comps that I think are really strong that you can go towards. Like I said, I'm only gonna pick 3 of them. One thing I want to note before we proceed any further in the video: first, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm always going to advertise that. Second, I want to make it very clear, most of the comps are fairly playable, right? Golden Ox, Amp, Cho'Gath is now really strong as well. If you're looking for like a new style of tank, Cho'Gath can work really well in like some bruiser setups if you're playing flexibly, right? I think MF can work really well. They buff Syndicate. Dynamo got a little bit nerfed, but you can kind of rearrange that board a little bit and play deeper into Syndicate maybe. Vex in certain spots is powerful, right? Slayers and Divinicorp is probably flexible. I'm just trying to pick ones that I think are relatively consistent and things that can help you. Not necessarily the highest cap boards, but like I said, I'm just trying to pick 3, especially if you're a beginner player, not to overwhelm you and just go through every single comp that exists in the meta, because that's what the rest of my channel is for. It's more so just like, hey, these are 3 options that I think will help you out, especially if you're just like starting on this patch, or you're a little bit lost at the start of the patch, didn't read the patch notes or something like that. So just to be clear with that, and now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it for reroll comps in case you have a spot that you want to maybe reroll or play around low cost units. First comp I'm going to talk about is Graves. I think Graves is extremely powerful. This unit is borderline bugged in my opinion. I can't really tell. Also, my music's a little bit loud. One second. Sorry, my chill Pokemon music is kind of ringing in my ear a little bit. But anyways, Graves, extremely strong. I think he's bugged. This guy wraps so easily. When I say wrap, he just jumps to the back line so easily. I don't even know how. It's crazy. But anyways, when you're playing this comp, basically what you're doing is you're playing Golden Ox, but you're, instead of pushing levels and playing like 6 Golden Ox, you're usually staying at 4 Golden Ox, and you're just playing reroll around Graves. Your goal is to hit Jarvan 3, Graves 3, and then in a really high cap version, you can also hit Senna 3, and that can kind of help you to like do insane amounts of damage. When you're rolling for Graves, typically you roll on level 6 just because the Graves is so important, but often you could even roll on level 7 if you're particularly high roll, just to guarantee like your Jarvan 3 and your Senna 3. But basically what you're doing is you're just stacking in some Divinicorp buffs just to help out your whole board. You're playing Golden Ox, which you roll and then you build up some damage amp, and then the rest of the synergies kind of just fall into place very nicely, or pretty nicely. When you're playing Graves, the main item I think that you usually want to start with is some rendition. Well, I don't know the exact order of what's the most important, but QSS seems very important. Graves basically just auto attacks. He doesn't generate mana. Like, he doesn't have like a mana threshold. It's just like every 2 attacks or whatever, he starts doing like bonus damage or whatever, and then he fires multiple projectiles. So you kind of want to just auto attack a bunch. QSS is really good because he just doesn't get stunned, being a, like, you know, pseudo frontline unit, being like towards the front of the board. You don't really want him to like, you know, get interrupted and just die. So you want to have constant uptime, just constantly attacking. QSS is great for that. Can't be stunned, and it gives a bunch of attack speed at the start. It also is made with a crit glove, which, if you know, Graves an executioner, so driving up that crit chance. He already has his ult critting. It's going to make it so his ult crits more often, which is just going to translate to more damage. So it actually works really well. Multiple synergies, really good item on him. Next, Sterix is really good. Sterix got a little bit of a nerf, so I'm not sure if it's still his like perfect good item. We'll see how things work out as the patch gets like, you know, a little bit more matured, because like right now people are still just playing what they used to play, so there's not much stats on other stuff, but I still think it's good. It basically gives you a second lease at life Sterix. It gives you attack damage and health, which is great. You want base attack damage here because he already has critting ult, so you just want to drive up his stats. He also has a bunch of damage amps, so he has crit, he has damage amp. How do you make him stronger? Give him base stats. How do you get base stats? Sterix is a good choice. It also gives him a health shield, which makes it so that if he jumps into backline, he has like a second lease at life. He's not just instantly dead when he hits 0. He has this health shield that can help him to live a little bit longer. And for same reason, Bloodthirster also gives him survivability, and then Omnivamp allows him to heal up the damage he's going to be taking, being a frontline unit. In terms of Jarvan, usually just put as many tank items on him as possible. He can also build pretty well with like a lot of different like melee style items, like Sterix works nicely on him as well. Jarvan can kind of work as like a secondary damage dealer in some cases because he has so much damage amp, especially when you crank the Golden Ox numbers. Senna usually holds your utility items, so you know you can build her for like full crit with all of her AD and stuff like that, but you can also put utility items on Aphelios, usually just finding some Golden Ox to put here. In some cases, if you're particularly a high roll, you'll even drop Aphelios for Viego just to get some extra front line because it doesn't matter that much. And then you just get Executioner and crit chance by playing Vex, but you can also itemize Vex as well. But this board, extremely strong. Something to keep in mind, usually you'll see people like kind of clump their units over to one side, something like this. Basically, this Graves unit, he attacks a unit. Like, I'll try and explain it with like some allowies here, right? So the Graves unit, he will like attack a unit. Then after attacking the unit, like he basically dashes through them when he casts. And then once this unit dies, I don't know why. Like, I don't know what's up with it. I think he's like maybe bugged or something. But like, he's like 2 hexes away from both units, the backline, the front line. I feel like every time I've seen this Graves, he just targets the backline. So it makes him like an absolute demon at like wrapping and suddenly just like winning the game and scamming the game off of a backline. So especially if someone isn't paying attention, hug one side, because you basically just want to dash through one of the units here and just like absolutely like just bang and turn around and just start melting the backline units. You want this Graves to be an absolute nuisance a lot of the time. Graves reroll also has a lot of really cool conditions, by the way, with different artifacts. So for example, Wit's End is pretty good on Graves just because of how he auto attacks, but specifically Trenchcoat, he's one of the best users of Trenchcoat because he dashes over here, he pops into 3 copies of himself, and then it's just GG and you win the round for free. So pay attention to Ornn artifacts or artifact galaxies because you might either be fighting against a Graves or you're going to be the Graves player. Next comp. So this is a comp that got recently buffed. I already thought it was pretty good. It's hard for me to gauge it, but I think it's good enough that I want to talk about it here, and that is the Kog'Maw reroll line. So basically what you do with Kog'Maw reroll is you reroll Kog'Maw 3-star, Vi 3-star, and then a lot of times you go for Skarner 3-star, but you could also go for Kindred 3-star and Silas 3-star, but your main priorities are usually these 3. Vi, Skarner, and Kog'Maw. Now Skarner usually is on back burner because you're rolling 1 cost, so usually it's Vi, like priority is these 2, and then the rest of the units, whatever you can hit. The idea with this comp is that it's extremely strong and stable around playing 6 Vanguard. Kog'Maw is an absolute demon in the early game as well as the mid game. He kind of falls off towards the end of the game, but usually by then you've already secured your top 4, which makes this comp a very consistent reroll. And the idea is that 6 Vanguard, especially now, it got buffed a little bit. So you have this impenetrable wall of a front line that's just so hard to deal with. And then you have Kog'Maw with Boombot as well as Rapid Fire just ramping up and doing an insane amount of damage in the back line. A lot of times you can even play this as a Fast 9 style of comp if you have a Kog'Maw 2, just because he's so ridiculous on stage 2 and stage 3. He's so ridiculously strong. But typically the items that you're going to play, being a auto attacker and attacking really fast, Guinsoo, and Krakens. You're just going to ramp up this Kog'Maw to a point where he's dropping nukes. Kog'Maw also empowers his auto attacks, right? Where his auto attacks are going to start dealing bonus physical. So if you get him ramped up with a Kraken's Fury, he's just going to melt everybody. Everybody's going to get melted. It's going to be like ice cream on a hot summer day. Like the whole board is going to be gone. You just got to get him up to that point, which is where the 6 Vanguard comes into play, right? You get him up to that point where he's melting, and then you're good to go. Last item, there's lots of different variations. A lot of times it's just more starting AD, like a Deathblade can work really well. But of course, that's like a little bit high roll, so you'll see even IE, you'll see double Kraken, I'm sure. And then you'll also see something like a Gwinsu in some cases. Lots and lots of options. If you have a particularly high roll spot, especially if you have a Boombot emblem, something that's really important to understand is that at one point this Kog'Maw is going to kind of fall off, right? Unless you're like no scout, no pivot, or you have some sort of crazy augment that helps you out. At one point, this Kog'Maw is going to start to suck. And what you can do a lot of times is if you're really high level, you can actually pivot this board a little bit, right? You can drop some of the Vanguard units, play some more Boombot units, and you can actually pivot into playing a bit of an Urgot board, right? Like, I've done it multiple times where I've played Kog'Maw, and then I just, like, lose the Kindred, and I just go on level 9, and I just play something like this, and it's actually a lot stronger. Or not a lot stronger, but it has some strengths, because Urgot 2, late game with, like, a Krakens, especially if you made Krakens already, like, especially if you have double Krakens or something like that, this unit just mogs. Like, he just, like, absolutely does an insane amount of damage. So I'm not saying to do this all the time. Of course, it's really dependent on your spot and what you have and your itemizations and stuff like that. But if you have the potential, it's just something to keep in mind that you can pivot into like a 4 Boombot build and just like move over items onto the Urgot when you get to those high levels. Now, it's not necessarily like the best thing to do all the time. This is more like when you're playing like, you know, trying to win the game out and like your Kog'Maw's like falling off. If your Kog'Maw isn't falling off and you're still doing a lot of damage, you can keep items on Kog'Maw. You don't have to do any of this, and you can keep in your Kindred and call it a day. Usually the pivot is better if you have a Boombot emblem, because then you can play 6 Boombot and then you Giga win for free. Then it's like obviously a better board. But of course, just keep that in mind. And lastly, last comp that we're going to talk about. So I was trying to think of what the last comp I want to talk about here today was. I think there's a lot of consistent reroll comps, right? One comp that I often consider to be really strong and I still think is really strong, really consistent is Morgana, like Morgana Bastions around Poppy Morgana. I've done a lot of videos on it, so you can check out my thoughts on that if you want to see it more. But I think the itemization for this comp makes it like really hard to play unless you have like, you know, starting tier good items for your units, because it's a little bit more item dependent. This is the Bruiser Techie like Mundo reroll line, so it's complete pretty early if you can find a brand, but basically you're gonna play Bruiser, Techie, and Street Demon, and then eventually you're gonna cap out your board with more Techies. The main units that you're rerolling are gonna be Mundo, Zyra, and Seraphine. A lot of times people will also go for Alistar because he's a 1 cost as well, but typically the main point of this comp, you need Mundo 3, and then usually you need Zyra 3, Seraphine 3. A lot of times you stay low level because the board's pretty complete. I think on level 8 you're like completely fine in a lot of cases. So usually you just stay low level, make sure that you hit all of your 3 stars, and then win out from there. When you play this comp, a lot of times the most important thing that you're going to want is a Warmogs on the Mundo. Mundo loves to have HP items, loves to have belt items because of his passive, as well as his active ability just scales a lot with the HP stat that he has. So he's just an HP demon. So, you know, if possible, you would just slam as many HP items on him as possible. So typically, at least 1 Warmogs is essential just because it gets so much value on the actual unit. Additionally, you'll see things like a Gargoyle Stoneplate, just because it just gives him a lot of armor, right? Even though he gets a lot of value off HP, getting a lot of armor very efficiently is very nice for him, just because it allows him to stay up and about and reduce the amount of incoming damage that he's taking, boosting those other stats. Additionally, you'll also see, for item economy's sake, a lot of times Sterix is made. I think Sterix used to be really broken on him because Sterix, the item, was actually just broken. It's still an HP item. It works really well. It gives him an HP shield, and he has an insane amount of HP, especially if he's 3-starred. So it's still a good item on him, but it's not like a priority item, I would say. I think it's like your 3rd item if you're going for like efficiency. This is like a really efficient build. Of course, if you have like a belt augment, or if you can afford to make like more Warmogs, I'm sure those will work out really nicely for you. But your items are pretty flexible past the first Warmogs is what I'm trying to say. You can even build like, you know, Declaw, Bramble Vest, like as long as you have your Mundos just staying alive like for an unbelievable amount of time, the board's going to be fine. In terms of itemizations for the rest of the units, however, Zyra, you want to build her with that similar like techie brand style build where you just want Shojin to help her to cast, and then you want to try and prioritize JG Guardbreaker if you can. If you can't do that, usually you just want at least JG. You just really want the spell critting. You really want the ult just popping off and doing a bunch of damage with all your base AP. With Seraphine, a lot of times she has really good spread. She's going to hit multiple units with her wave. So it works out nicely to put utility items on the Seraphine. So, you know, your Mundo will have Giga Tank items. You don't really want to make like utility frontline items. You just want the Mundo to be a monster and do a bunch of damage and live forever. And then you want to put your utility items as a backline carry because you're going to have 2 3-star backline units. Something that's really important to note, however, is once you hit Brand 2, a lot of times he's better than Zyra 3. In my opinion, I think that as soon as you hit Brand 2, you can transfer your Zyra items onto the Brand and it will likely do more damage. The Brand just is that much better of a unit a lot of the times. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine, but I think it's usually the right decision. When you're trying to cap out this board, however, you could go deeper into Bruiser, but typically just go into Techie. So a lot of times you're just going to play around Viego. Usually swap out one of these units, like one of the worst bruisers. If you don't have Alistar 3, you can swap out Alistar, and then you go for Kabuko, and then you just play the Vigar just to give the Kabuko the Cyber Boss bonus. And this is like your high cap level 9 style of board once you get there. So this board, even though it's like a 1-cost reroll, you're still playing a very strong late game board, right? You can imagine if you have Kabuko 2, Viego 2 with 6 Techie in, you actually cap very high with this board. So this board can actually win a lot of games, even though it's more of like a consistent reroll style of comp. So one thing to recommend always is like when you're playing it, don't overroll for your 3 stars. Try to stay above like those certain econ intervals like 40, 50, just to make sure you have enough gold to be able to push levels later, because you actually benefit a lot from being able to push levels with this reroll comp. Some of the other reroll comps, you know, they're kind of like complete. You don't have to really level up that much more. Think like your Graves reroll. Like, what do you care about leveling up here? There's like nothing you're going to put on your board anyways. So like, you know, like as long as you can make it to like level 8 and fit in 4 Golden Ox and your rest of your units, you're probably fine. But something like this, you benefit a lot from being able to push levels. So you want to play it, number 1, from a good spot, right? You want to have multiple copies of the units so you're not rolling deep. And number 2, you want to make sure that like, you know, roll until you're stable, and then like don't greed too much for the 3 stars. Obviously you have to hit them all like before stage 4 or like around start of stage 4 to make sure you don't fall off a cliff. But that's what I'm trying to say. Just don't like overdo it and hit them really early, because you really want to be able to push those levels to cap out the board really high into your late game. But anyways, those were the comps. Like I said, I'm going to make the other PSA same as I did in the middle of the video, because I know everybody just always likes to skip around in my videos, so I want to make sure I repeat myself multiple times. There are many comps that are playable this patch. There are many really strong comps. There are many really high cap comps. Obviously, you have like your strat amp comps that are like broken, extremely strong. You have like lots of other things. There's Vex in certain spots that's really strong. There are Marksmans or even like Golden Ox that is very strong. There's even like Fast 9 playing around Urgot and Boombots. And all these sorts of emblem comps. Of course, there are so many comps that are playable. When I make these videos, like I said, per always, I usually just do 3 non-rerolls and 3 rerolls just to make it comfortable, make it easy if you're a beginner player, just some general tips and some ideas of comps that you might not have played before to get you head started on the current patch. And these are the ones that I think are relatively consistent and good enough to, like, you know, reliably get those top 4s, right? Not necessarily first every single game, but pretty safe options in your games, especially if you're uncontested. So thanks for watching. Hopefully that was informative and helpful in some way. If it was, make sure to drop a like and a subscribe, and then we're going to get back to doing some guides and some more nitty-gritty details later in the week, so look forward to those if you're a guide enjoyer. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and see ya. Bye-bye.